Hello, fellow foodies, and welcome back. This is Dr. Cassandra Quave, and you're listening to Foodie Pharmacology, the science podcast for the food curious. This week on the show, I am so excited to have Dr. Temple Grandin as our guest. Temple is a prominent author and speaker on both autism and animal behavior. Today, she is a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. She's the author of many books on the subjects of autism, such as Thinking in Pictures, as well as her area of scientific expertise in animal behavior, such as her Guide to Working with Farm Animals, Safe, Humane Livestock Handling Practices for the Small Farm, which I've personally found to be incredibly useful on my dad's small ranch recently. Um, Temple also has a successful career consulting on both livestock handling equipment design and animal welfare, and she is a proponent of the humane treatment of livestock for slaughter. She's been featured on NPR and a BBC special. She's also appeared on national TV shows such as Larry King Live, 2020, 60 Minutes, Fox and Friends, and she has a 2010 TED Talk. Articles about her work have appeared in Time Magazine, New York Times, Discover Magazine, Forbes, and USDA. And if you haven't seen it yet, I definitely recommend you check out this HBO film. It's an award-winning movie about her life, and it's titled by her name, Temple Grandin, and she was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2016. Well, thanks so much, Temple, for coming on the show. It's great to see you again.
Great to be here.
Yeah. So as I mentioned in my email, recently we had the tragedy of my father passed away, and he left in my care a small ranch of around 30 head of cattle. And overwhelmed was a word to describe what it was like for me to take this on. And when I was looking for resources, I immediately thought of you and your incredible work you've done with animal behavior. Um, and I've just been gobbling up books on beef cattle recently. So I wanted to take this opportunity to learn a bit more from you about animal behavior.
Okay.
Maybe we could focus on cattle because I know that's an area of expertise for
Right.
you. Um, and just learn a little bit more about how do you as a scientist study the behavior of livestock like cattle?
Well, the first thing in animal behavior, when I took a course in it a long time ago, is an ethogram. And what an ethogram is what does the animal do in its day? Now, animals such as cattle spend a great deal of time grazing. That would
Mhm.
be a major part of their ethogram, which brings up the paper I just wrote because uh, grazing is actually one of the things we can do with livestock that is truly sustainable.
Mhm.
Do grazing right, you can improve land. And what a lot of people forget is that 20% of the Earth's habitable land can only be grazed. Let's just look here in Colorado, for example. If you take I-70 out east of the airport and you get maybe 50 miles out, there'll be no more housing developments. You have a huge stretch of land there, of plains. It can only be grazed. There's not enough water in the ground or from the sky. You go up to Cheyenne, Wyoming. It's only 35 miles north of where I live. There's a 100-mile stretch up to Douglas. I just drove it about a month ago or so. And
Mhm.
it's all grazing land. What are you going to do with this land? Not raise food on it? You're going to have to graze cattle, bison, some other animal. I've got a paper on grazing cattle, sheep, and goats is an important part of a sustainable agricultural future. It's a free download paper.
Awesome.
And if you do rotational grazing right, you can actually improve land. You can also do grazing with cover crops. Let's say you're grazing corn and soy. Well, if you want to just start out really simple, you might do every third year some wheat. And if you graze it before it heads out, it's grass-fed, as long as it doesn't head out.
Mhm.
And if you're really, really clever, you can get a crop of wheat out. And the cattle fertilize the land, and you don't have to use so many, artificial stuff. And what I've done in this paper is I've just reviewed a whole lot of research that people can just find in one place. I've worked in the cattle industry for 50 years. So I did this paper, it was just about 2 years ago, because I got sick and tired of cattle being bashed as something terrible to get rid of. When
Mhm.
the grazing animal, bison should have been on the paper. That was an oversight. They can improve land if you do it right. If you do it wrong, you wreck land. You have to make sure that you do grazing correctly and you rotate the pastures and you give the grass time to regenerate.
Well, this is a really good point, Temple, about, the importance of grazing animals and managing these natural ecosystems. And One question that I've had recently is how many cattle is too many per acre of grazing land?
Or you
What
have to,
kind of
you're going to vary with different grazing land. But if you do what's called
Mhm,
mob grazing, you kind of bunch them in fairly tight because I want them to eat the celery along with the candy.
mhm.
If you spread them all out, then they just cherry pick it and they pick the cherries off. Or as Fred Provenza says, they eat the best and leave the rest. And you don't want that. What you want to do is kind of bunch them in kind of tight and let them take half of it,
Mhm.
take half the grass. And then you've got to give it a chance to totally regenerate. And the green stuff regenerates faster than the roots. You've got to wait for the roots to regenerate before they come back on it. And it's going to take, maybe 2 to 5 years to see the soil health improvements. That doesn't happen overnight. But a lot of these plains lands evolved originally with grazing. Another thing that you can use grazing for is fire control. I was just
Mhm.
reading an article just the other day about goats being brought in to eat down a lot of noxious weeds and things like that. And we had 1,000 homes burn right here outside of Denver 2 years ago. If they
Wow.
grazed the field that was across the street from those houses, maybe they wouldn't have burned. And I was just up in another place and we were going down the freeway and I'm looking at houses about like this far apart and fields there, high fields. I'm going, let's graze those.
Yeah.
Those houses
Well,
are so close together, there's no way you can defend them.
what are your thoughts on controlled burns? I've also heard of controlled burns for cattle pastures, like after they've fed. Like, do you think that's useful for reducing parasites in the
Or
soil
it does
or
reduce parasites, although do
Mhm.
that in the sandhills of Nebraska. I've been through the sandhills of Nebraska, and where the roads are cut through, you can see there's this much soil, and then it's rocks.
Wow.
And you can see that where they've cut through for the road. That's where
Mhm.
you can really see it. And then you have um then you have the sandhills of Nebraska. I think they have a different name for the part in Kansas. Um, but it's land that can only be grazed. And let's look at the whole methane thing. Yes, cattle do put out methane. Well, right now there's a satellite that's been put up in the air that's going to measure the methane off of garbage dumps. And I don't think
Uh-huh.
it's going to be very pretty. We need to be trapping all the methane that's coming off wastewater treatment plants. In fact, the Cargill Fort Morgan plant is already doing that. They're capturing methane and they're using it to run the boilers on the big membrane over the lagoons. That's the
Mhm.
thing to do. And they get a big piece of their power bill taken over from that, which is good.
From capturing that. That's really
And
good.
those are things that are really good. And we've got to use livestock right. Now, of course, another thing is I'm very concerned about animal welfare.
Yes.
And I've done a lot of work with the slaughter plants,
Mhm.
and they've greatly improved because you measure simple things. Okay, how many cattle can stun on the first shot? I can measure that. How
Mhm.
many cattle fall down during handling? I hope none. But that's something that you can measure.
Mhm.
And I've got another paper on practical application of the 5 domains, and this contains a lot of very nice scoring tools for assessing animal welfare out on the farm. How many
Mhm.
lean cattle do I have? Or if it's a dairy, how many dirty cattle have I got? Or swollen joints? Those are things I can measure. And then I can tell, am I getting better on this or getting worse?
Mhm.
Manage what you measure. And there's a lot of welfare theory that's way too complicated. What I tried to do with this is just really work on the practical application. This is another free download paper.
That's great. Well, I think one of the things I found so valuable in your book that's really
Is your
targeting
first book
kind of
right here in
small
the
yes, this
guide to
book,
working
Working
with
with
farm
Farm Animals.
animals.
Beautiful book for anyone that's interested in farming or thinking about getting started with even a few animals, not just cattle, but also sheep or goats or chickens. Um, what I really appreciated was all the attention you put into design. Because one thing I think perhaps people don't fully appreciate is the cycle of needing to work cattle. That's been something I've been learning about too, is working them, giving them their medication to ensure that they're wormed, or tagging their ears or checking their health. Um, and handling large animals, it's tricky. So what advice do you have that you can share Or maybe you could even show the audience some of your diagrams and how you've kind of created
Well,
these
this book
shoots.
has very
Yeah.
simple diagrams, but
Mhm.
I have other diagrams. This is a diagram right here I did for a loose packing plant for my hand-done drawings. In fact, that's
Mhm.
the drawing that I sent to Target years ago uh, to sell them on the idea of having me design a whole lot of stuff for them.
Yeah. And so what is the advantage of these types of designs, Temple, for the average person that doesn't really understand the full process of working with
Well,
cows?
as the animals go around the bend, they think they're going back to where they come from. Now, in this book here, I have simpler layouts that you can make out of portable panels.
Mhm.
Much simpler things. Here are two of the layouts here. You can
Yes.
actually set these all up with portable panels. Well, another reason why, there's two reasons why people are doing more and more portable panels. First of all, nobody knows how to weld anymore. And that gets into my other thing, taking skilled trades out of the schools was a really bad idea. The other thing is more and more people on leased land. And if
Mhm.
you concrete your facility into the ground, the landlord owns it. If it's a
Yeah.
portable facility, it sits on top of the ground and you stop leasing that land, you can take it with you. That's furniture. It's not
Mhm.
attached to the earth. It's a very important thing. If you're leasing land, anything you concrete into the ground, you've just donated it to the landlord. And the
Yeah.
realtors are pretty strict about that.
Mhm. Yeah. And so when these cattle go through this bend, it kind of calms them
Well, the
by
cattle just have a natural behavior to go back to where they come from. So
okay.
if you put cattle down an alley, they'll tend to come back. So if
Mhm.
you have a system where they naturally go back to where they came from, that's just using the natural behavior, and that's going to make it easier to handle them.
That's great. That's great. Um, one other thing I've been wondering about is the cattle's line of sight. You talk about this a bit in the book, kind of what can spook them, what is that like for when cattle are
Well,
walking? What's
cattle's
their line of sight?
eyes are
Yeah.
here.
Mhm.
Okay, so they can see all the way around except for one little blind spot in the back. Now, why do cattle have eyes there? So when they're grazing, they can look all around for predators, any little thing that moves. And it's really important to get little distractions out of your facility. Paper cup on the ground, just something like that can make them stop. A piece of
Mm,
string hanging down. There's little small things that people don't notice. You need to get those things out of your facility. Shadows can have a big effect. Those
mm,
sharp shadows, like when it's really sunny, they may be
mhm.
stopping more at sharp shadows compared to a cloudy day when you don't have sharp shadows.
Okay. Wow.
I was just going to see if this book's got some pictures of some of these things. Um, yeah,
Well,
here's
this
an example of just kind of, shadows.
oh, that makes sense. So we have, like,
And,
even
and on a
from
cloudy
fencing.
day, those shadows
Mhm.
won't be there. And they're
Yeah.
going to handle just fine.
Yeah. Well, like, this past weekend, I had hired 3 cowboys to help us round up the cattle to give them their worming shots and to ear tag them, because we'd had some problems with we thought it was our cows, it was actually neighbors' cows that were getting out, and so we wanted to make sure we had a way to track them better. Um, but something that was interesting is as they were trying to run them down the chute, they told me to get behind the trailer and kind of hide
Well,
because just
repeatedly, don't get
being
them all excited. Is it
yeah,
yelling and screaming? Let's try to stop it. Let's try to
yeah,
just use your
very calm.
calmly, use the
Mhm,
point of balance that's described in my book. If
mhm,
you get behind the shoulder to get them, they move better than if you stand in front of the shoulder sometimes. Because
mhm.
if you get them all excited, yelling at them, it takes them 20 minutes to calm down.
Yes,
That's how
yeah,
long. If you've ever been in a near car accident, I can
mhm,
remember when a board came off a trailer and I managed to avoid being hitting it, but it took me 20 minutes
mhm,
to calm down. It took about 10 minutes for the swearing to stop. And
yeah.
you can instantly get scared, but it takes time to calm down.
It does. No, you're absolutely right, and if they see something, I was in their line of sight, just so even being silent, but in that line of sight when they're going down an alley, was not a good idea 'cause I kinda just my presence spooked them.
Well,
Um,
hopefully you have some decent cattle handling facilities.
Yeah, we do. We
Good.
do. I looked at your designs, and I think they're in good shape and alignment with that.
Well,
So,
that's good
yeah.
because you've got to have something to hold them in. Do you have a complete squeeze chute or just a head gate?
We have a well, I don't know if it's we have the head gate, and it's kind of the wooden panels that they get into, and there's like a part where you can kind of block it behind them. I don't know
You
if
just
that's
block it behind
considered
them.
a
It doesn't actually have a squeeze. Sounds like you just have a head gate
doesn't
on the end
squeeze
of
the
an
whole
alley.
body. Yeah,
And
it's like an alley. Mhm.
and if you're just sticking a pipe behind them, I'd like to replace that with a gate.
We have a gate. We
Good,
do have a gate.
good.
It's
I
like
do
a
not.
swinging gate.
I
Yeah.
hate sticking pipes behind cattle. I've seen too many accidents with that.
Okay,
Yeah,
good to know.
that needs to be replaced with a gate.
Yeah. So we have the swinging gate, and it all went really smoothly with their help because, I mean, I didn't know what I was doing, so I definitely wanted professional to make sure
But
it was done correctly.
some people that consider themselves professional, can do too much yelling and screaming at cattle, and that's
Yeah.
not a good thing.
Yeah. I've heard that of that issue before, but, no, they were very calm. It was
Well,
that was
that's
their way. It was
good.
very calm. One other thing we've been advised, and I wanna know your thoughts on this, was, you know, before my dad passed, I think he basically worked them on his own, which meant he had a system, and I think his system was just calling them with food, and I've heard different people give advice on different sound signals to call
What's
cattle with a
important is
treat.
having consistent sound
Mhm.
signal. You want them to come in for a sound signal, not just chasing trucks around. Because you need to be able to drive a vehicle out there. I don't care if it's a four-wheeler or what it is,
Yeah.
car, it doesn't matter what it is, and not have cattle chase it. You want
Yes.
maybe the horn of the vehicle associated with coming in. In Oklahoma, where
Mhm.
police sirens are very popular,
Oh,
and
really?
they
Okay.
work. They work. And
Uh-huh.
they're taking cattle they bought at the auction. Feeder calves, they're going to background them and grow them out some on grass. And you ring a police siren and they come in because that's now associated with food. They're also ambulance chasers. When we had an accident out on the freeway, they're all there running over there and watching. Where can we get fed?
Where's our treats? Yeah.
Or where are their treats? Yeah.
I thought about I wondered what you thought about this. My mom has an old iron bell and these big antique bells, and I
You
was
mean
thinking of
your
putting that out there and ringing it and then putting the food in
You
in the
ring
in
the
the in
bell
the
and then
alley.
ring a bell, then immediately put the food down.
Okay. Okay.
So you ring the bell, that feed needs to be put down instantly.
Mhm.
So they
Great.
associate whether it's a car horn, a bell, so that sound is instantly associated with the food.
Instant associations. Great. Great,
Because there's
great, great.
nothing worse than you try to go out just to check something like check the water and they're all chasing you. You don't
Yeah.
want that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great advice. Okay, I've got a plan then, because that's my goal is I would
You
love
know
it
what?
to
Another
where
thing
they could
that
just
when
ring a bell and they come and get in the chute so they can be given their medicine
well,
and
and then the
things
other thing that
easier.
will help them get in the chute is they have a treat when they come out.
Yeah. Oh, good point.
That helps, and it needs to be a treat.
Mhm. Yeah.
They don't have to have
So what
very
are
much. They don't have to have very much. It can just be like a half a coffee cup of green or something, just a tiny,
mhm,
tiny treat.
little treat. That's great. I mean, it's funny because it almost reminds me of like dog behavior, right? You're
We
training
don't.
them to do yeah.
And the other thing is controlled movement.
Okay.
You like, let's say you're switching pastures. You don't want them just charging out of the pasture. If they got young babies, they'll leave the babies
Mhm.
behind. You always want a
Mhm.
controlled movement.
Okay.
And when I went out to Oklahoma recently and they rang the siren, they walked in controlled.
Oh, that's good.
And so they come
Yeah.
up controlled. Then I put the feet a reward polite behavior. I don't want great big huge animals pushing and shoving. If they come up and
Mhm.
they're pushing and shoving, let's say on a four-wheeler, then they don't get the feed. Like you
Yeah.
have huge animals pushing and shoving. Be polite, ladies. Then
Mhm.
I put the food down. Then the instant there's a little bit of polite behavior, throw the feed down. Because a lot
That's
of
great.
people don't realize it, but they're actually training cattle to be pushy. Because
Okay.
if you put the feed down when they're shoving and pushing, now you've just rewarded pushing and shoving.
Mhm. So it sounds like immediately rewarding good
And
behavior
I want
is
to
a way to
reward good
really
behavior,
Mhm.
not
That's good.
pushing and shoving. If you're going to
Yeah.
change pastures and they're mobbing the gate, I'm not going to open it.
Mhm. That's good advice.
No, you want to reward polite behavior. I don't want these big, heavy animals pushing and shoving. Their little shoves are too strong for us.
Yeah. Well, I have another question, Temple, and I'm wondering what you can share with us about cattle breeds. I know in your book you talk about the whorl on the head
Yep, right.
being
They have a hair
related.
wool way up here. They
Mhm,
tend to startle more easily. Our Angus at our experiment station have a hair wool way down here. They don't startle
mhm,
as easily. But the other thing that's concerning me about breeding is over-selecting for production traits. We're getting some very, very bad foot problems now in certain Angus cattle because they're just
mm.
selecting for high weaning rates. I'm going to try to find this picture on my phone on of really, really dreadful looking on cattle feet. They you over-select for production traits, you can start getting problems like congestive heart failure, for example.
Oh my
Okay, here
goodness.
is that's a hideous foot. That is on a 4-month-old red Angus
Oh,
heifer, and she's on a tilt table. That was sent to me by a lady named Melinda. She's a veterinarian back east.
yeah.
Four
So the
months old. That's not foundered. It hasn't had any grain. That's a hideous foot.
Mhm.
That
So kind of for the listeners that don't see that, we have some listening, some watching video. For those of you that are listening, it's kind of like the hoof parts are kind of curved, and when
well and
we're it would
crossed. The toes are crossed.
crossed, the toes
And
are
that
crossed.
is
Yeah.
not normal foot
Mhm,
behavior. Also, just recently had a paper come out on problems, hoof problems, and congestive heart failure problems in grain-fed cattle. And that
mm.
just came out a couple of days ago. Okay, and they're breeding cattle so much for big and fat at a younger age. These animals are starting to get congestive heart failure.
Wow.
And I can show you some hearts here. Okay, now my phone just decided to turn off. But up there on the top, you've got the
Mhm,
normal hearts.
mhm.
Look at these bloated soccer balls.
Wow.
That's really abnormal.
I
And
didn't realize cows could
this is
get cattle.
something that 10 years ago was not happening. And
Yeah.
it's breeding.
Mm. So when we
Selecting,
talk about breeds, you mentioned Angus. In Florida, we have Brahman and Angus mixes. So like I have Brangus cattle is what you would call them, I guess. What types of what type of cattle are primarily raised out west? Is it Angus or
well, it depends upon how far south you are. If it's the hot
mm,
climates, we got a lot of Brahmin influence. Now, these
mhm,
problems with the hearts, I don't think you're going to see that as much in the Brahmin crosses. And they're going to have better feet. Some of the worst feet right now is in Angus because it's
mhm,
gotten very popular. And the Angus Association did a very good job of marketing it. And they now have scoring tools for feet, like that
mm.
4-month-old heifer. She shouldn't be used for cow. She needs to go to beef. You
Yeah.
just should not be perpetuating that kind of a trait.
Yeah. And when you say go to beef, that's for sale for meat versus breeding additional calves. Just for the folks that don't like, maybe we can start by a simple definition also, because I'm realizing I've now learned this vocabulary, but many of our listeners don't. So we have a bull calf, which would be a
Young male,
young male, a heifer calf, and then you have a heifer is a
young
larger.
beef female before it has its first calf.
Okay, before its first calf, then you have a cow, which is one that has calves
Yeah,
or has had. Mhm.
she's had more than one, usually more. You have
Yeah,
first
and then you
calf
have the
heifer. You
bull.
have a first calf heifer, and then after that, well, second one, she's a full-fledged cow then.
Full-fledged cow, and then you have your bull, and then you have your steer, and the steer is a bull that's cut usually when they're how old? When they're castrated
It
at,
can vary
like,
from
they're
being a baby calf to being older.
yeah, yeah, and the steer will put on is it true that they put on more fat in their muscle, or what happens with the physiology of
Well, one of the
steers that's
reasons
different?
why what's interesting about cattle is in countries like Europe, areas there, they don't even know what a steer is. They raise them as bulls,
Really?
and they're
Okay.
raised indoors very intensively.
Mhm,
Same thing in some of the Asian countries, and then the countries where the cattle are very extensively raised, the U.S., Argentina, Brazil,
mhm,
that Australia, that's where you tend to have they castrate the bulls. They're easier to handle. The other
mhm,
thing is if you feed bulls in a feed yard, you have to make sure that you don't mix them together because they'll fight. And that's going to
mm,
cause very severe meat quality problems. So if you have a pen of 100 bulls at a feed yard, they have to go to slaughter with the pen mates. Do not mix them with another pen. You'll have
yeah,
really bad fights. And and Yeah, that's
And
perfect.
if they fight or hit each other or they're damaged in the chute, or even if you give them an injection, like for worming medicine into a part of the muscle where you're going to get meat, that can damage
That can
the
damage the meat.
quality
That can
of the
damage
meat.
the meat. That's the reason for all the sub-Q injections, or subcutaneous. Like when I
Mhm.
first started, everything was being given in the muscle. And I remember back in the 70s, I would ask, well, doesn't that wreck the meat? Putting, 5
Mm.
cc's of something, whatever, into it.
Yeah.
And they go, it was just absorbed. Well, then they
Mhm.
started studying at the meatpacking plant, and they found that it was not just absorbed. It
Yeah.
was damaging the meat. That's reason for
Mhm.
moving the shots away from the rear and doing it up here in the neck, is that's cheap cuts, and doing it under the skin.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and there are other types of beef cattle, and maybe these are different species. I forgive my ignorance here. I'm not sure if they are, but you have like Wagyu beef.
That's beef
That's
cattle. Yeah.
Yeah, and that Wagyu is known for having a lot of marbling. What's different about Wagyu, and are those being bred, or are there types of Japanese that style of beef being bred
No, it's it,
into?
it's it's the Japanese breed of cattle, and it bred them for marbling. And
Mhm,
the Angus cattle have good marbling, but I'm very concerned about some of the welfare issues we've been breeding in animals. And I'm going to bash
mhm.
the pets just as much as I'm going to bash the the food animals.
Okay.
But what's happening right now is some of these beef cattle, they've got getting these hoof problems really bad. Certain lines of
Yeah.
Angus, not all Angus. I was just up in Canada, and the cattle looked great up there. But there's
Mhm.
certain bulls that got horrible feet. They've got heart problems, and it's sort of indiscriminate breeding for the meat production traits. And the new paper is basically titled "Problems with Congestive Heart Failure and Lameness in Heavy Grain-Fed Steers and Heifers,"
Mhm.
because we don't raise bulls here.
Yeah. Well, in Florida, we only do grass-fed. I mean, basically, the way I understand the Florida beef cattle industry to be is that they're raised up until a certain age, and then, they start selling them probably around 3 to 400 pounds, or they'll wait till you have yearlings, or, once they're older cows, they get sold at market.
Yeah,
But I don't believe that much of the grain feeding, or stockyard kind of practices, are as prevalent in Florida. I think that's more of something they get shipped out west. So
well,
what is that like across
a
your
lot of cattle are
feedlots?
raised.
Yeah.
Cows and calves are in the eastern U.S. It's too
Mhm.
rainy and muddy for feed yards there, so they're shipped to the
Okay.
west. That's where.
That's
Here's
why.
my paper right here on the congestive heart failure.
From
And
the congestive heart failure. Okay, great. Wow.
that's another paper that you can download
Open
for free.
access. Great, great. Okay, so they're sent out west because of it's too wet to do a
It's too
feedlot.
wet. And people in the 70s tried doing feedlots in the southeast. It was just a wet mess.
Mhm.
I So the cattle get shipped west into the drier areas to be fed
That
out.
makes sense. Yeah.
But the whole East Coast, the Virginia, it's Carolinas, those are really good places for raising cattle.
Mhm. So when we talk about grass-fed beef versus feedlot fed, what's the difference? I mean, I've had advice from some people because I've been thinking about maybe I should raise a steer and keep it for ourselves to cut up as meat, and everyone keeps telling, "No, no, you have to put it on grain for a bit before you butcher."
Well, there's
Um
different tastes in grass-fed beef. All
Mhm,
right, it's going to take longer to grow them.
mhm.
And what basically is done, the regular beef, is the calf spends half its life out on the pasture
Yeah.
and then the other half its life in the feed yard, unless you have beef on dairy. And what that
Mhm.
is Angus semen being used on Holstein dairy cows because they make more calves than what they need for heifer replacements.
Oh,
And so now you have
okay.
an Angus sired, Holstein cross calf, and then those are fed out. And those are getting
Okay.
very, very popular.
Mm.
And the good news on that is it makes those young male calves more valuable. And
Mhm.
it's getting rid of an industry I just despise, and that's bobtail. Slaughtering day-old calves. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
no.
ick. I was involved in
Yeah.
that in the 80s. It was just awful.
Mm.
And beef on dairy will get rid of that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
Well,
that's the
what
good
is
news.
veal, Temple? What is veal? Because I'm sure people see that on the menu, but maybe they don't know
Well,
exactly what
most
veal is.
veal that you have on the menu here, it's a milk-fed calf, and
Mhm.
they get it up to about 500-600 pounds.
Mm.
Now, the reason why the veal industry started was to use the surplus male calves. But what's happening now is beef on dairy is taking over. There's some parts of the country where half of the beef cattle on feed are beef on dairy.
Oh, wow.
So now you're taking those calves and growing them up into big cattle, which I
Mhm.
probably prefer, big cattle.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's great. So in your work on the humane treatment of animals, of livestock, Kendall, what have been the biggest changes that you've seen happen since you
Hand,
started? You've been in this industry.
handling has
Mhm.
greatly improved. That
Great.
is the good news. I've been in this industry 50 years,
Mhm.
and during the last 15 or so years, handling has greatly improved. Back in
So
1999, I worked with McDonald's Corporation, Burger King, and Wendy's on inspecting the slaughter plants for handling and stunning. And they had to make their scores or stunning scores. They had to do their scores. And when you've got big customers like that, making them improve, they improve. Now, the thing that made me really happy in that situation is out of 74 plants, only 3 had to buy expensive things. Most
oh.
of them were able to get in really good compliance with training and repairs and non-slip flooring.
Mhm.
That fixed most of them.
And so when you're thinking about handling, this is about ensuring that the cattle have a less frightening,
That's right.
less painful
Well, it
experience when
starts
they're
out with people
slaughtered.
not screaming at them, just good
Mhm.
cattle handling practices, because they get asked, are they afraid of getting slaughtered? No, they're more afraid of a reflection on a piece of metal. And
Yeah.
if you remove that reflection, they'll go right in. But the first
Mhm.
step is calm handling. And then
Yes.
and then the problems we had stunning back in 1999 is that the equipment was broke.
Oh, no.
Now people are really taking care of that equipment.
Mhm.
The packing plants have really, really improved. So now what bothers me is we've got packing plants that are working just great. And now we've got twisted feet, and these animals don't want to walk. And if they have problems with their heart, they're sluggish, just don't want to go.
Mhm.
I'm right now, I think if I got a problem at a slaughter plant with welfare, you got to give me some animals I can handle.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. So it's really a breeding problem at
That's
this
a breeding
stage
problem.
then. Yeah.
Oh, the
Mhm.
pets are disgusting. There's horrible naked cats that are dwarfs with defective leg joints that just bend and break.
Mm.
I don't know why
Yeah, tell
people.
me about these miniature cows. This has become really popular on social media, on Instagram, like these little miniature cows. Everyone wants a miniature
Well, we've
cow.
got
What?
to make sure that we don't breed defects. We
Yeah.
go overboard on different traits. You can start
Mhm.
really getting things wrong with animals. Take a
Yeah.
bulldog that can't breathe. And that's
Mhm.
just terrible. If you have a little pug, if your nose goes maybe this much longer, a quarter of an inch longer, you just let that nose have a little bit of nose, then they can breathe. Just breed
Yeah.
it less extreme. But I have a real problem with people breeding animals that don't function.
Yeah.
And if somebody had told me 20 years ago that we were going to have beef cattle heart problems, I wouldn't have even believed it. Now, for years, there's been heart problems up in the high altitudes,
Mhm.
but eastern Nebraska is not high altitudes. And
Yeah.
they
You're
started
talking about.
noticing that just about over 10 years ago, late
Mm.
stage deaths, and they thought they were pneumonia. They weren't
Mm.
pneumonia, they were heart failure. And that's the
Mhm.
things that I've been discussing in my paper on the congestive heart failure was, this paper right here. Problems
Mhm.
with the congestive heart failure and lameness have increased in grain-fed steers and heifers.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine, as consumers, it's not good to be consuming beef of animals that are lame or stressed or in poor health, because of course those health stressors probably pass on into the meat flavoring, the meat quality.
Well, if we reached
Um,
looking at animal welfare, one of the changes is in the past, we always worked on preventing suffering. We've got to prevent suffering. We've got to prevent
Absolutely.
pain. But now
Mhm.
there's going to be more emphasis on, does the animal have a life worth living? Does it have a good life?
Yes.
Does it have some
Mhm.
positive experiences? We
Mhm.
got to prevent suffering, but that's not sufficient.
Yeah.
You want to see a dairy cow loving something, you can look up those videos of dairy cattle using those rotating brushes.
Oh, yeah.
Just type in dairy cow motorized rotating brushes from YouTube. You will find those videos.
That's great. Well, that's a great example. I mean, are there things like that that small farmers or even larger scale farmers could integrate into their rearing practices to foster happier
Well, you just
cows,
have cattle
happy
grazing out on
cattle?
nice pasture.
Mhm.
They're going to be happy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. I feel like ours are pretty happy. We have a creek that runs through the property, and they love to walk through the creek and, lay in the shade by the oak trees. They have some different sunny areas and shady areas to rest,
Well, that's good. And then
which is nice.
you see, and where are you located?
The ranch is in South Central Florida near Fort
Well,
Myers.
that's why you've got to bring this, because you need to have some ramen in Florida
Mhm.
for heat stress, to
The heat
prevent
stress,
heat
yeah.
stress.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, and they're good about staying out, like, when it's really hot, they definitely get into the shade
Oh, they
or
do.
get in the water. Mhm. Yeah, that's great. Well, Temple, in your journey, of working with animal behavior, what's your vision for the future when it comes to animal rearing practices? You've really helped accomplish so much in reducing pain and distress, at
Better we're
slaughterhouses.
done with slaughterhouses, and now if there's a problem in a slaughterhouse, it's lots, especially the big ones.
Mhm.
Well, you gotta have animals who can walk.
Yeah, it's probably gonna be more focused on making sure we have better breeding practices then and that we don't have defective genetics.
Well, the problem with these genetic things, you have to be very careful to not let bad become normal. You get too used to looking at lame cattle, you don't see them. In
Yeah.
fact, a study done, 3 different studies have shown that if you ask a dairy producer how many lame cattle they'll have, they underestimate by half. And then when they
Mm.
measure it, they're shocked. But you get used to seeing it, bad becoming normal. Now,
Mhm.
what's been going on right now with the lameness and the congestive heart failure, there seem to be some parts of the country we don't have it. I was really pleased. I went up to Calgary. Oh, the cattle look great. Oh, they were
Oh,
gorgeous.
nice.
I can show you some pictures of some of the cattle up in Calgary. Oh, we
Yeah.
even had a pen of old-fashioned Herefords. They were so cool.
Oh, wow.
Let
That's
me just
nice.
show you um, some of the.
And in Calgary is where they have the famous stampede,
Yeah, that's
the
right.
big Yes, that's great.
Well, here's some
That's great.
cattle in the stockyard at one of the big plants, really nice cattle.
Oh, they
And
look good.
they're
Yeah.
all no, they looked really, really good. They looked
Mhm.
just great.
Wow, and these are all range cattle,
Yeah,
so they're
these
nice
are all
and
right,
big from
here is
grazing.
that's feed yard cattle right there. I'm getting a phone
Mhm.
call, I'm not gonna answer it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
that's feed yard cattle.
Yeah. So, I have a question, Temple,
You know,
too, is
and that's
when you
and really, really nice feedlot cattle.
Yeah, they look good.
And all of those walked just fine.
Yeah.
Nice and clean, and they walked just fine. And around the Omaha area, they seem to be having less problems. But there's certain parts where I think it has to do with what bulls they're using, where
Mhm.
their feet are horrible and they've got a lot of congestive heart failure. And in my paper on congestive heart failure, on there was a study done out in Idaho. It was awful. Something like 34% had some swelling of the heart, and 4% or so were in late stage congestive heart failure. That's disgusting. And that was a
Wow.
paper that was published 2 years ago in Idaho.
And is this congestive heart failure developing while they're on the range when
Yep.
they're
Well,
grass
yeah, it is
feeding?
developing.
Wow.
And the heart gradually gets more and more swollen and weaker.
Mhm.
And then they're gonna get sluggish and not want to move. And
Yeah,
it's genetic.
it's a genetic
And the
factor, yeah.
genetics has been found. And one of the traits is related also with some of the foot problems is a rancher in Virginia just sells his calves at the auction. So when they wean the calves off at 6 months, they just sell them. So you got a heavy
Mhm.
calf, he gets more money. So then they're just
Mhm.
breeding for a heavy calf. So rapid growth at a young
Oh.
age. That's one of the
Mhm.
traits.
Okay.
Ribeyes has been another of the traits.
Mhm.
And it's just recently really getting to be a disgusting problem. But it's regional. You get Calgary, they didn't have it. I talked to people at a plant in Omaha, and they said, "No, we don't have those awful feet."
Hmm.
See, I think it gets back to the bulls that are being used.
That
Because
would
the
make sense,
Vanguard
and
here in
then
Colorado was doing beef on dairy. Now, they have
Mhm.
very good records, so they know exactly which bull sired that calf. And they were getting late-stage deaths from congestive heart failure, like 2
Mm.
weeks before slaughter, dropped dead in the feed yard.
Wow.
They traced it back to a single Angus bull, and they got rid of that bull, and that fixed it.
So, is there something like I'm just wondering, like in terms of regulatory bodies, like does the USDA
Well, the
track
USDA,
this
the,
or
the USDA, Humane Slaughter Act covers stunning and handling. Now, if cattle, let's say that animal falls down in the yard at a slaughterhouse and it can't walk up the chute itself, it shoot it in the yard and it goes to rendering, which is basically throwing it in the garbage.
Mm,
And that regulation came in after the mad cow mess, a number of years ago.
yeah.
The downer pigs are allowed to slaughter, but the downer cattle are garbage. And some of these, you get a lot of downers, they shoot them and throw them in rendering.
Wow.
And that's, they strict rules on humane slaughter. But if I get a whole bunch of animals in that are lame, doesn't make them easy to handle if they don't want to walk, they don't want to get up.
Yeah.
Now, since you got the Brahmin influence down there, you're probably not going to
Mhm.
see so much of this because the Brahmin influence doesn't, the Brahmin lines don't have this problem.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I would say I was very proud to have the cowboys say, "Oh, your cattle are really good." They didn't expect them to look as good as they did because my dad had been sick for so long, and so I don't know the last time that they've been wormed, but they were looking they're good-looking cattle, their feet look good.
Good, and they
They're
nice,
nice
straight
they're
looking
nice and
feet.
fat.
And
Yeah.
anything that has
Mhm.
a crushed toe, you don't want to breed that.
No, absolutely not.
That's a trait you do not want to breed. And
Yeah,
there's some good hoofs. My paper on congestive heart failure has got references to some nice scoring tools.
for the feet.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. Well, I had another question about feedlots, Temple, and I'd love to get your opinion on, where antibiotics play a role in the beef industry. I understand like the need if you have like mastitis or inflammation, infections in the teats and things, and I know that those are treated locally to as veterinary care. But where do antibiotics play a role still in beef cattle, or do you think we're using less antibiotics
Well,
now in the
like,
feedlots, or
you always got to treat sick animals. But one of the things the
yeah,
industry's going to have to back off on is just mass feeding of antibiotics. I don't care whether it's cattle, pigs, or chickens.
yeah,
Where you've got a problem with resistance is that when you put the manure out on the soil, you're now
mm-hmm,
dumping antibiotics into the soil, and antibiotics come from the soil originally.
yeah.
It's where they come from.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to have to reduce that because of the antibiotic resistance issues. The other thing is if we breed animals just for maximum meat, we might be breeding some of their strength out because
Oh,
it takes
yeah.
energy to run the immune system. I like to look at genetic selection sort of like a national budget. And if
Mhm.
I put my entire national budget into the economy, meat, milk, or eggs, I'm going to shortchange my infrastructure. That's the
Mhm.
skeleton, the feet, reproduction, the heart. Maybe I
Yeah.
shortchange the immune function, my military, because that's
Mhm.
going to take uh, energy to operate. Nothing is
Yeah.
free.
That's a great point. I mean, we have to pay a lot of attention to that. How do you select for the right traits? And this has got me really thinking about, when the time comes to get a new bull, um, looking for the right traits in a bull to ensure that the herd stays healthy.
Well,
Yeah.
then they see the small ranchers in the eastern United States that just sell the calf at 6 months old. They're going to pick a bull that's good. They want easy calving and a
Mhm.
high weaning weight.
Yeah.
Now we just go completely berserk on the high weaning weight. Okay,
Then you get the
then
problems with the toes and the
well,
yeah.
we get problems. You see, this is the problem. You overselect for any single trait, you're going to mess up your animal. You've
Mhm.
also done a really good job messing up some pets too.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you've given me a lot to think about, Temple. This is, it's a regional issue, but it's also a national issue. It's something that affects all of us. I think, no one likes to perhaps this may be uncomfortable for some of our listeners to think about the whole process of going from raising animals for slaughter, but the reality is many people in this country eat beef
Well, we got to
on a
give our
regular
farmer
basis,
a
so we
good
need to
life,
know where they come.
give them a good life in
Yeah,
their life. That's
exactly.
what we need to be doing.
I agree. And that I think that, healthier animals leads to healthier food, which I think in turn supports our health as humans, as consumers. So thank you for all that you've done, Temple, in ensuring that, we have had improvements in the slaughter process, because I think that goes a long way in making um things more humane.
Oh, in the 80s, the slaughter plants were a mess in the 80s and
Yeah.
90s. And when you have big customers inspecting them, and one of the reasons why it worked is they had a very simple scoring system.
Hmm.
When you hang them on the rail, they've got to be unconscious, period.
Hmm. It's good.
95% shot unconscious on the first shot. No more than
Great.
1% falling, 3% moving and bellowing in the
Mm.
stun box area. That's those are very simple measurements.
Yeah. And so you can track that and get
And
improvements.
they
That's
then they
great.
can also track, they can tell if they're getting better or they're getting worse.
Yeah. That's great. Wow. Well, I think we're just about out of time, Temple. What can we tell the audience? I know you mentioned you have your book for small farms.
And the book,
Um,
Small Farms,
mhm.
and also the book on visual thinking. Because one of the things
Yes.
that helped me working with animals is being an extreme visual thinker. And this book does have a chapter on animal consciousness. But I
Hmm.
also talk in here about problems with things like taking out all the welding classes and the people like me that can't do higher math, but who need us. Like you look at a piece of equipment like a good cattle head gate. I mean, somebody
Hmm.
had to invent that. That's a
Yes.
mechanical device. And and um, you're going to learn a lot about how people think. I'm a visual thinker. That's more like how an animal thinks. And then I also got my books, Animals in Translation. Animals
Hmm.
Make Us Human. I discuss animal emotions. They
Hmm.
definitely have them.
Oh, absolutely. Each of them has a different personality.
Sure.
I know that we've been naming the different ones based on their
You've
personalities.
got the hothead that's in the back, and then you've got the more friendly one that just wants to eat feet out of your pocket. And
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Temple, for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
okay, well, thank you so much for having me.
Great. You've been listening to Foodie Pharmacology, the science podcast for the food curious, recorded for you today on Squadcast. I want to thank our producers, Rob Cohen and Christine Roth, for putting on this great show. And thanks to you, our listeners, for tuning in. You can find this and all of our other episodes at foodiepharmacology.com, or head over to YouTube and look at the Teach Ethnobotany YouTube channel, where we have the video versions of this in our other episodes. Thanks so much for listening. Stay healthy out there, and I'll see you next time.